The Seattle morning was crisp, with a slight mist clinging to the windows as Emily Carter rolled over in bed. Reluctant to wake up, the clock on her nightstand read 6:30 a.m., its glowing numbers a stark reminder of her ever-busy life. Just 5 more minutes, she thought, closing her eyes for a brief moment of peace. But before she could sink back into slumber, the rapid patter of small feet echoed down the hallway. "Mom, are you up? Breakfast is ready." The voice of her 12-year-old son, Nathan, rang through the door before it creaked open. His bright brown eyes peeked inside, his hair still slightly tousled from sleep, but his energy was already at full speed. Emily let out a soft chuckle as she sat up, shaking away the drowsiness. Nathan had always been an early riser, full of enthusiasm, full of life. It was one of the many things she adored about him. "Good morning, Nathan. You're up early today." "That's because I have my big science presentation at school today," he said with excitement, bouncing on his toes. "Did you forget?" Emily's eyes widened. She had forgotten. Between juggling deadlines at her publishing house, preparing for an upcoming business trip to San Francisco, and handling day-to-day life, the days had started blending together. I'm so sorry. Sweetheart, I completely forgot," she admitted, swinging her legs over the bed and rubbing her forehead. "I'll get ready right away." Nathan just grinned. "It's okay. I made breakfast." Emily's heart swelled with pride. Nathan was growing up so fast. The little boy who once clung to her leg now had a strong sense of independence. When she entered the kitchen, she was greeted by toast, scrambled eggs, and orange juice neatly placed on the counter. "Did you make all this yourself?" Emily asked, genuinely surprised. "Yes, I practiced for my cooking homework." "Does it look edible?" Nathan asked, his voice filled with excitement. Emily took a bite of the eggs and nodded. "Delicious. You're a natural, kiddo." As they ate, her mind drifted back to the past. 3 years ago, her life had been completely different. She had been married to Daniel Carter, a highly respected neurosurgeon. Their early years had been blissful, filled with dreams of a happy family, romantic date nights, and promises of forever. But as Daniel's career soared, their marriage crumbled. He was always at the hospital, working endless shifts, attending conferences, and flying across the country for research. He was a brilliant doctor but a distant husband. Emily had tried to hold on. She had begged for balance, for family time, for a chance to save their marriage. But Daniel's priority was always his career. When their relationship finally shattered, the divorce had been civil, cold, but civil. Emily was granted full custody of Nathan, with Daniel receiving visitation rights every other weekend and 2 weeks every summer. He lived across town in an upscale condo, still buried in his work at the Seattle Medical Center. Despite everything, Emily had to admit one thing: Daniel loved Nathan, in his own way. "Is Dad coming to see me this weekend?" Nathan's voice pulled her back to the present. Emily hesitated before nodding. "Yes. He mentioned taking you to the aquarium on Saturday." Nathan's face lit up. "Awesome. I really wanted to see the new dolphin show." Emily smiled at his excitement. Even though she and Daniel had failed as a couple, Nathan still adored his father. She took a deep breath, pushing away the bittersweet emotions. "I have something else to tell you." Nathan looked up from his plate. "What is it?" "Next week, I have to go on a business trip to San Francisco. But since it's your spring break, I was thinking, would you like to come with me?" Nathan's fork clattered against his plate as his eyes widened. "Wait, really?" "Yes. We can go sightseeing in between my meetings. There's a huge aquarium, and we could even take a cruise on San Francisco Bay." Nathan practically leapt from his chair and threw his arms around her. "Best trip ever." Emily chuckled. "So, that's a yes?" "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." His enthusiasm filled her with warmth. This trip would be special. It had been a long time since they had gone anywhere together. Just the two of them. That evening, she called Daniel to inform him about the change in plans. "San Francisco?" Daniel's voice was neutral, emotionless as usual. "Yes, just for 4 days. I wanted to let you know since it overlaps with spring break." A pause. Then, "That's fine. I'll reschedule my weekend with him." Emily nodded to herself. "Thank you. Also, about Nathan's violin lessons. I want to increase them. He has talent." Emily sighed. "Daniel, He's still a kid. He doesn't need to be pressured. It's not pressure. It's potential. Their conversation ended shortly after. As it always did, brief, businesslike, and devoid of warmth. That night, Emily lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. She had built a good life for herself and Nathan, a quiet home, a stable career, and love that was constant, even if it came from only one parent. But something was nagging at her. A strange feeling in the pit of her stomach that she couldn't quite explain. If only she had known how much her life was about to change. The morning of their trip to San Francisco arrived with the crisp, golden glow of the Seattle sunrise filtering through the curtains. Emily Carter zipped up the last of her suitcases, running through her mental checklist. Clothes? Packed. Tickets? Double-checked. Excitement? Absolutely. Nathan, are you ready? She called up the stairs. Almost, came the muffled reply from his room. Emily glanced out the living room window. After the divorce, she had moved to a quiet residential neighborhood, a charming house with a small garden and a cozy, peaceful atmosphere. It was the perfect place to rebuild, to start over. A few minutes later, Nathan bounded down the stairs, backpack strapped tightly over his shoulders. His 12-year-old face was lit with excitement, but his backpack looked heavier than it should have been. Are you bringing the entire house? Emily teased with a chuckle. Nathan grinned and unzipped his backpack, revealing his essentials: a tablet, headphones, a sketchbook, colored pencils, 3 books, and Emily's eyes narrowed. Is that your chemistry set? Nathan shifted awkwardly. Maybe. She sighed. You know you can't bring that on the plane, right? I was just gonna do some experiments in the hotel. Nathan protested. Emily ruffled his hair with a smirk. Not happening. Einstein. They loaded their luggage into the waiting taxi, the crisp morning air swirling around them. As they pulled away, Nathan excitedly listed off the places he wanted to visit: the aquarium, Golden Gate Bridge, Alcatraz. Mom, do they really say Alcatraz is haunted? He asked, eyes wide with curiosity. Emily smirked. Guess we'll find out. The ride to Seattle-Tacoma International Airport was smooth, and soon they were stepping into the bustling terminal. Emily checked them in via her phone, receiving their digital boarding passes. She handed Nathan his. Keep this safe. Got it. He saluted. The airport was packed with travelers, families heading off on vacation, businesspeople rushing to their gates, and the usual chaos of announcements blaring overhead. As they approached security, Emily turned to Nathan. Remember, put your shoes and backpack in the tray. Okay? I know, Mom. This isn't my first time, he said with a dramatic eye roll. Emily chuckled. Her son was growing up too fast. She stepped through the metal detector first, no issues. Then it was Nathan's turn. As he walked through, a sharp beep 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 echoed through the checkpoint. Emily's heart skipped a beat. Nathan froze. A uniformed TSA officer stepped forward. A tall man with a calm but authoritative presence. Sir, please step back and remove any metallic objects, he instructed. I don't have anything, Nathan said, looking confused. Try again, the officer said. Nathan stepped through once more. Beep beep beep. Emily felt a cold chill creep up her spine. The officer exchanged glances with his colleague, then spoke into his radio. Code 4-2 at checkpoint B requesting additional screening. Nathan looked up at Emily, eyes wide. Mom, what's happening? She forced a smile, kneeling beside him. It's probably just a mistake. Honey, maybe your belt or something in your pockets. I don't have anything, Nathan whispered. 2 additional TSA officers arrived. One of them a woman with a serious but kind expression. Ma'am, we're going to need to conduct a full body scan, she explained. Emily's stomach dropped. A scan? Yes, it's just a precaution. We need to check for any concealed objects. Emily's heart pounded as she nodded. Okay, but I'm coming with him. Of course, the officer assured her. They were led to a small, enclosed security room, where a large X-ray scanner loomed in the center. Nathan fidgeted nervously. Mom, this is weird. I know, sweetheart, she whispered, but let's just get it over with. The scanner hummed to life, and Nathan was instructed to stand still, arms slightly raised. A large mechanical arm rotated around him, capturing detailed internal images. The process took only a few seconds. but the weight of suspense made it feel like an eternity. Then, the monitor beeped. Emily watched as the officer's expression changed. Her brows furrowed, her posture stiffened. She turned and quickly whispered something into her radio. The male TSA officer re-entered the room, his face unreadable. Emily felt her hands tremble. What is it? What's going on? The female officer hesitated before speaking. Ma'am, the scan has detected a small metallic object embedded near your son's left shoulder blade. Emily's breath caught in her throat. What? That's impossible. She turned to Nathan, who looked just as confused. Mom, I don't have anything inside me. The officer's tone grew serious. We don't know what it is yet. But this is not normal. We strongly recommend you take him to a hospital or, more urgently, she looked Emily straight in the eye. Go to the police. Immediately. Emily's world spun. Police? A metallic object inside her son? Her voice trembled. That's a mistake. Nathan has never had surgery. Never had anything like that in his body. The officer's expression softened slightly. But her resolve didn't waver. Ma'am, we understand this is shocking. But this isn't something that just appears in a person. It had to be implanted. Emily felt like she was drowning. Someone put something inside her son? Who? When? How? Nathan's eyes were filled with fear as he grabbed her hand. Mom, what does this mean? Emily swallowed hard, squeezing his fingers. It means, she said slowly, her voice shaking, we're not going to San Francisco. We're going to find out the truth. The ride to the Seattle Police Department was eerily silent. Emily held Nathan's hand tightly as the taxi weaved through traffic, her heart pounding so hard it echoed in her ears. Her mind raced with terrifying possibilities. Who could have implanted something inside her son? How? Why? Nathan sat beside her, his 12-year-old face pale, his body trembling. Mom, he finally whispered. Am I sick? Emily's chest tightened. No, honey, she said, stroking his hair. We're just going to figure out what's going on. But she wasn't sure she believed her own words. When they arrived at the police station, Detective Mark Davidson greeted them in the lobby. He was a middle-aged man with sharp blue eyes and a commanding presence, though his expression was kind. Mrs. Carter? He asked, glancing between her and Nathan. Yes, Emily replied, her voice uneven. He nodded. Let's talk in my office. As they walked through the station, Emily felt the weight of every officer's gaze on them. This wasn't a normal case. Something about this was big. Once they were seated, Detective Davidson leaned forward. I've been briefed by airport security. A foreign metallic object was found inside your son's body during an X-ray scan. Correct? Emily nodded. Did Nathan E.V.? Emily swallowed hard. No, never. The detective turned to Nathan. Son, have you ever felt anything strange? Pain? A weird lump under your skin? Nathan hesitated, then slowly nodded. Sometimes, my left shoulder blade gets hot. But it never hurt. I thought it was just from sitting weird in class. Davidson exchanged a serious glance with his partner, a younger officer named Lucy Price. Emily's stomach churned. Detective, what exactly is inside my son? Davidson took a deep breath. We don't know yet, but these types of implants, they don't happen by accident. Someone put it there deliberately. Emily felt the room spinning. You mean? My son was targeted. Davidson finished grimly. Nathan's small fingers gripped Emily's. Mom, does this mean someone did something to me? Tears burned behind Emily's eyes. But she forced herself to stay strong. We're going to find out. Baby, I promise. Davidson stood. I need to call a specialist. Someone who deals with cases like this. Emily's breath hitched. Cases like this? You're not the first, he said, picking up the phone. A sick feeling coiled in Emily's gut. 30 minutes later, a woman in a sleek black suit entered the office. She introduced herself as Dr. Evelyn Reed, a specialist in biotechnology and forensic implants. Mrs. Carter, she said, her voice measured but firm. I need to ask you some difficult questions. Emily nodded, gripping Nathan's hand. Go ahead. Dr. Reed's sharp gaze locked onto Nathan. Do you remember any medical visits that felt unusual? Maybe a time you were asleep and woke up confused? Nathan's brows furrowed. Just my tonsil surgery. That was last summer. Emily stiffened. Dr. Reed glanced at Detective Davidson. Who nodded knowingly. Mrs. Carter, she said carefully. Where was that surgery performed? At Northwest Children's Hospital. It was a routine tonsillectomy. Nothing was wrong. Reed flipped through a stack of documents. Who was the surgeon? Emily swallowed. Dr. Daniel Carter, my ex-husband. The room fell into silence. Davidson and Reed exchanged tense glances. Mrs. Carter, Davidson said, his tone darker now. Your ex-husband is a surgeon? Emily's heart pounded. Yes, but what does that have to do with? Reed turned the monitor towards her. On the screen was an enlarged version of Nathan's X-ray. There, beneath his left shoulder blade, was a tiny, metallic device. This is a tracking implant, Reed said flatly. Military grade, nearly undetectable in standard scans. And it was inserted with surgical precision. Emily gasped, her stomach flipping violently. No, she stammered. That's not possible. Reed's voice remained calm but firm. Who had access to your son's unconscious body during his surgery? Emily's hands started to shake. Richard, her ex-husband. The world blurred around Emily. She remembered Richard's strange behavior after the surgery, his constant check-ins. His sudden drop-ins to see how Nathan was recovering. Her ex-husband, a renowned pediatric surgeon, had always been controlling. But this was insane. Davidson's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. We've contacted Northwest Children's Hospital, he said. We need access to the surgical logs, surveillance footage, and Dr. Carter's personal records. Emily's breath hitched. You think he really did this? Davidson's gaze was unreadable. We don't think, Mrs. Carter. We know. A cold sweat broke across Emily's back. Nathan clung to her arm. Mom, did Dad do this to me? Emily's throat felt too tight to answer. She couldn't believe it. She didn't want to believe it. But deep inside, she knew. Richard had always wanted control. Over their marriage, over Nathan. Even after their divorce, he had never truly let go. Davidson exhaled sharply. Mrs. Carter, we need to act fast. If your ex-husband implanted this, then he's been tracking your son every single day for the past 8 months. The walls seemed to close in. Emily clutched Nathan tightly. Mom, Nathan whispered, what do we do now? Emily took a shaky breath and met Davidson's eyes. Now, she said, voice hardening, we stop him. Emily sat frozen, her grip tightening on Nathan's hand. The walls of the police station felt like they were closing in on her. Richard had done this. Her ex-husband, Nathan's own father, had implanted a tracking device inside their son's body. But why? Detective Davidson's voice was firm yet careful. Mrs. Carter, we've initiated a full-scale investigation. We've already obtained a warrant for Dr. Carter's medical records and his office at Northwest Children's Hospital. Emily's stomach churned. Richard was one of the most respected pediatric surgeons in Seattle. If what they were suggesting was true, it meant that for 8 months, he had been monitoring Nathan's every move, tracking him like he was some kind of possession. Are you okay, Mrs. Carter? Asked Dr. Reed, the forensic specialist who had identified the implant. Emily blinked, her throat dry. No, she admitted. No, I'm not okay. I don't understand why he would do something like this. Reed sighed. Obsession can drive people to terrifying extremes. Emily shivered. Obsession. That word made her stomach twist. Nathan shifted uncomfortably. Mom, he whispered, is Dad going to jail? Emily's breath hitched. She didn't know how to answer. Before she could respond, Detective Price, Davidson's partner, entered the room, holding a folder. We got it, she said, her voice grim. The surgical records. And you're not going to like this. Davidson took the folder and flipped through the documents. His jaw tightened. Mrs. Carter, he said, we need you to confirm something. This is the hospital's record from the day of Nathan's surgery. The original surgeon assigned was Dr. Elliot Ramos. But at the last minute, a substitution was made. Emily felt her stomach drop. Dr. Daniel Carter, Price finished, sliding the document toward her. Emily's hands trembled as she scanned the page. There it was, in black and white, her ex-husband's name under operating surgeon. Her pulse pounded in her ears. He did it, she whispered. He actually did it. Nathan shrank back in his seat. Mom, I don't understand. Why would Dad do this to me? Emily felt sick. Nathan was too young to understand the full depth of what his father had done. Davidson cleared his throat. Mrs. Carter, this isn't just an invasion of privacy. This is a crime, and we have to consider the possibility that this wasn't just about tracking. Emily's head snapped up. What do you mean? Davidson hesitated before answering. A military-grade tracking device like this isn't easy to get. Richard Carter isn't just an ordinary doctor, he's well connected. We need to find out what else he's been involved in. Emily swallowed hard. Are you saying he might have done something even worse? Price nodded. It's possible. Emily could barely process what was happening. So what do we do now? Davidson exhaled. We bring him in. 2 hours later, Emily sat in a surveillance van, watching through a monitor as a team of officers approached Richard Carter's house, a large, modern home in an upscale Seattle neighborhood. It was 7 p.m., and the sun had already set. The house's interior lights glowed warmly through the windows, casting an eerie contrast against the darkening sky. Emily felt a cold sweat trickle down her spine. Inside that house was the man she had once loved, the man who had fathered her child, and he was about to be arrested for violating his own son's body. Through the surveillance feed, she saw Richard appear in the doorway, wearing his usual button-up shirt and slacks. He looked calm, even composed, until he noticed the badge on the lead officer's chest. Dr. Carter, the officer said, we have a warrant for your arrest. Richard's face darkened. What is this? You're being charged with unauthorized medical implantation, illegal surveillance, and child endangerment. Please turn around and place your hands behind your back. Emily held her breath, waiting for Richard to protest. Instead, he simply smirked. You're making a mistake, he said smoothly. I was only looking out for my son. Emily's stomach twisted. He doesn't even deny it. The officers cuffed him, and as they led him to the patrol car, Richard finally looked directly into the surveillance camera. Emily shivered. He knew she was watching. The interrogation room at the Seattle Police Department was cold, dimly lit, and filled with an oppressive silence. Emily watched through the two-way mirror as Richard sat across from Davidson, his hands cuffed to the metal table. Why did you do it? Davidson asked. Richard leaned back, his expression eerily smug. I protected my son, he said. Emily never understood that. She took him away from me. I had to make sure he was safe. Davidson's face hardened. Safe from what? Richard tilted his head. From her. From the world. Emily's blood ran cold. You tracked his every move. Davidson pressed. Why? Richard's jaw tightened. For the first time, he hesitated. Davidson leaned in. Who else was involved? Silence. And then, you won't find them, Richard said, his voice disturbingly calm. And even if you do, it's too late. Emily's stomach clenched. Too late for what? Davidson slammed a folder on the table. We've already started searching your office and home. We know this wasn't just about your son. Richard finally lost his composure. His eyes darkened, his nostrils flaring. You have no idea what you're up against, he hissed. Davidson leaned back. We'll see about that. Emily wrapped her arms around herself, trembling. This wasn't just about Richard anymore. There was something bigger, and whatever it wasn't over yet. Emily sat in the waiting room of Seattle Memorial Medical Center, her hands clenched together so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. The air smelled of antiseptic and freshly brewed coffee from the nearby vending machine. But she barely noticed. Nathan was in surgery, even though the doctors had assured her that it was a routine procedure to remove the tracking device. She couldn't shake the unease settling deep in her chest. Her 13-year-old son had been walking around with a foreign object implanted inside his body, without his knowledge. Without her knowledge. And Richard had done it. Her ex-husband, the man she had once trusted with her life, had orchestrated this. Mrs. Carter? Emily's head snapped up. A surgeon in blue scrubs stood before her, his face calm yet serious. She stood so fast that her chair scraped against the tile floor. Is he okay? The doctor nodded. The procedure was a success. We removed the device completely, and there was no damage to surrounding tissue. Emily let out a shaky breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. You can see him soon. The doctor continued, but there's something you should know. Emily's heart stopped. What? She whispered. The doctor hesitated. Then, he pulled a small plastic container from his pocket. Inside was a tiny metallic chip, no bigger than a thumbnail. This, he said grimly, is not an ordinary tracking device. Emily's stomach twisted into knots. What do you mean? The doctor gestured for her to sit. His tone now carefully measured. We expected a standard GPS tracker. Something that only transmits location data. He explained. But this, he shook his head. It's something more advanced. It has biometric capabilities. Emily's blood ran cold. Biometric? She echoed. Are you saying it was monitoring my son's body? Yes, the doctor confirmed. It was recording his heart rate, body temperature, sleep cycles, even stress levels. Someone was not just tracking where he was, they were studying him. Emily's vision blurred. Who would even have access to this kind of technology? She demanded. The doctor's expression darkened. Only high-level research labs, military-grade contractors, or someone with extensive medical connections. Someone like Richard. Emily gripped the arms of her chair, her mind racing. What the hell had Richard done? Before she could ask more questions, her phone vibrated in her pocket. With trembling hands, she pulled it out. An unknown number. Her heart pounded as she answered. Hello? A deep, distorted voice responded. You should have left it in. Emily's entire body went rigid. Who is this? She demanded. The line went dead. Her breath came in shallow gasps as she stared at the screen. Her mind screamed for her to rationalize. Maybe it was a wrong number. Maybe it was just a prank. But deep down, she knew. It wasn't. Mrs. Carter? She snapped back to reality as the doctor touched her arm lightly. You look pale. Are you all right? No, she wasn't. She forced herself to nod, gripping her phone so tightly that her nails dug into her palm. I need to see my son, she whispered. Minutes later, she was at Nathan's bedside. His small frame lay motionless beneath the white hospital sheets, his face pale from the anesthesia. Emily sat beside him, brushing his hair back. Mom? Nathan's voice was groggy, his eyelids fluttering open. Emily forced a smile. Hey, sweetheart, you did great. Nathan frowned slightly. My shoulder feels weird. That's normal, she assured him. The doctor said you'll be sore for a few days. Nathan seemed to process this. Then his eyes flickered with concern. Mom, is Dad in trouble? Emily's throat tightened. She didn't know how much to tell him. She wanted to protect him, to shield him from the nightmare she had uncovered, but lying wasn't an option either. Yes, she admitted softly. He is. Nathan bit his lip. I don't understand. Why would Dad do this to me? Emily swallowed the lump in her throat. I don't know, honey, but I promise you, I won't let anything happen to you. Nathan nodded sleepily, his body relaxing, but Emily's mind was on high alert. Who had called her? And what did they mean by, you should have left it in? Emily left Nathan's room 20 minutes later. Still shaken. She needed answers. She called Detective Davidson. We need to talk, she said urgently. Something isn't right. 30 minutes later, she was sitting in the back of a police surveillance van outside Richard's home. Detective Price turned toward her. We've been combing through Richard's computer, she said. He kept extensive records on Nathan, his locations, biometric data, even sleep patterns. Emily felt sick. What the hell was he doing with that information? Davidson spoke next. That's the problem. Some files are missing. Emily's head snapped up. What? Davidson nodded grimly. Someone remotely accessed Richard's computer this morning. Before we could seize it. Emily's stomach plummeted. Wait, you're saying someone else was involved? Price tapped her laptop screen, showing a log of recent remote access attempts. Not just someone, she said. Someone who knew we were coming. Emily's blood turned to ice. The phone call. Go to the police immediately. Whoever had called her, they weren't warning her. They were threatening her. Back at the hospital, Nathan stirred in his sleep, his small fingers twitching. He was dreaming. In his dream, a shadowy figure stood beside his hospital bed, speaking in a low, mechanical voice. Don't worry, Nathan, the figure whispered. We'll find another way. Nathan whimpered in his sleep. And as the machines around him beeped softly, a tiny blinking light inside the metal trash bin, where the device had been discarded, began to flash. Emily sat in the dimly lit interrogation room of the Seattle Police Department, staring at the small metallic device on the table. It was enclosed in a plastic evidence bag. But even through the clear barrier, it felt like it radiated malice. She had spent the past 2 hours watching detectives and forensic analysts examine it. Every second felt like an eternity. Detective Davidson leaned against the wall, arms crossed. His normally composed demeanor had cracked, revealing deep concern. "This thing is more than just a tracker," he finally muttered. "It has a transmitter, real-time data collection. Whoever put this inside your son wasn't just tracking him, they were studying him." Emily's stomach churned. "Studying him?" she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. Detective Price, the department's tech specialist, pushed a folder toward her. "We pulled Richard's hard drive," she said grimly. "At least, what was left of it after someone remotely accessed and wiped half the files." Emily's pulse spiked. Someone had been watching. "These are the recovered logs," Price continued. "They show consistent uploads of Nathan's biometric data to an unknown server." Emily's hands trembled as she flipped through the documents. Heartbeat fluctuations, stress levels, sleep cycles. And then she saw it. A column labeled, "Response to Stimuli." "What the hell does this mean?" she demanded. Davidson exhaled. "It means Richard, or whoever was accessing these logs, was testing him." Emily's vision blurred. "Testing him?" she repeated, bile rising in her throat. "For what?" Davidson exchanged a look with Price before answering. "We think they were monitoring his reactions to specific situations. Anxiety, fear, exhaustion, even his responses to different environments and social settings." Emily's mind reeled. "They were using my son like an experiment?" "That's what it looks like," Price admitted. Emily's heart pounded violently. "I need to talk to Richard," she said suddenly. Davidson tensed. "Emily, I need to know what he was doing," she interrupted, slamming her fist on the table. "And I need to know now." Richard sat in a holding cell, still wearing his prison jumpsuit. His once pristine appearance, perfectly ironed suits, crisp shirts, neatly combed hair, was long gone. Now, his beard was unkempt, and his eyes were sunken from exhaustion. But when he saw Emily standing across from him, his expression remained unchanged. "Emily," he greeted, as if nothing had happened. She wanted to scream. "Cut the crap, Richard," she snapped. "You put a tracking device in our son's body. You were monitoring his every move. Why?" For the first time, a flicker of hesitation crossed his face. "You wouldn't understand," he said quietly. Emily slammed her hands against the metal table between them. "Make me understand." Richard exhaled, rubbing his temples. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," he murmured. "I never meant to hurt him." Emily's fingernails dug into her palms. "Then tell me what you did." Richard hesitated, and then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he admitted, "I wasn't working alone." Emily's blood turned to ice. She stumbled back, shaking her head. "What do you mean?" Richard refused to meet her eyes. "There were other parties involved," he admitted. "I was approached years ago, offered funding for my research in pediatric cardiology." Emily's stomach lurched. "Funding?" she spat. "For what?" Richard hesitated again. "For studying the effects of environmental stress on young developing hearts." Emily felt like the room was spinning. "You mean, they wanted to see how children react to fear?" Richard's silence was all the confirmation she needed. "Oh my God," she whispered. Her hands trembled. She looked at the man she had once trusted with her life, with their son's life, and realized he had been hiding a monstrous secret. "You let them use Nathan as a lab rat," she said, voice hollow. Richard swallowed. "I didn't." "You did," she screamed, her voice shaking the walls. He looked away, shame finally creeping into his face. "I tried to protect him," he murmured. "You have to believe me." Emily let out a shaky laugh. "Protect him?" she echoed. "You violated him, you betrayed him, and now you expect me to believe you were trying to keep him safe?" Tears pricked her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Instead, she stood taller. "You are never seeing Nathan again," she vowed. "And if you think for 1 second that I'll stop until I've burned down everyone involved in this, you don't know me at all." Richard flinched. But Emily didn't care. She turned on her heel, storming out of the room, her hands clenched into fists. She had work to do. Back at the police station, Davidson and Price were waiting for her. "Well?" Davidson asked. Emily's jaw tightened. There's more to this, she said. Richard wasn't acting alone. Davidson and Price exchanged glances. Then we need to find out who else is involved, Price said firmly. Emily nodded, her heart pounding. Where do we start? Davidson pulled up an encrypted file recovered from Richard's computer. We traced some of the signal transmissions from Nathan's tracker, he explained. They led us to a private research lab in San Francisco. Emily's breath hitched. Who owns it? She asked. Price hesitated. Then, in a low, serious voice, she said, your ex-husband's former mentor. Emily's chest tightened. Dr. Matthew Whitaker. A name she hadn't heard in years. But a name she would never forget. Emily's hands clenched at her sides. If he was involved in this, she said, he's going to pay. Davidson nodded. We're heading to San Francisco. Are you in? Emily's eyes burned with determination. Absolutely. Emily sat in the dimly lit office of the San Francisco FBI Field Division. Her hands clenched into tight fists. The walls around her were lined with classified case files, the room humming with the low murmur of agents on urgent calls. Across from her, Detective Davidson and Agent Sarah Monroe were sifting through the latest intelligence reports. The name on the screen in front of them sent a fresh wave of rage through Emily's veins. Dr. Matthew Whitaker. The man who had once mentored Richard. The man who had been a respected figure in the field of pediatric cardiology, and now, the man who was possibly at the center of a horrifying conspiracy. He's been running a black market operation for years, Agent Monroe muttered, flipping through pages of intercepted emails. Under the guise of pediatric research, he's been collecting biometric data from children with specific health markers, tracking their vitals, monitoring stress responses, studying their genetic predispositions. Emily's blood ran cold. And Nathan was one of his test subjects? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Davidson nodded grimly. Richard sold access to him, he confirmed, through that tracking device. Whitaker's team had direct access to Nathan's biometric data, his heart rate, his anxiety levels, even his sleep patterns. Emily's hands shook. Her innocent, trusting son had been nothing more than a research subject to these monsters. What were they trying to do? She demanded. Monroe exhaled, leaning back in her chair. Best guess? They were running predictive stress modeling, trying to determine how young children with certain genetic markers respond to emotional and environmental trauma. Emily's stomach churned. Predictive modeling, trauma response. Nathan had never been sick a day in his life, yet these people had been watching his every move. As if he were some kind of specimen. Where is he now? Emily asked, her voice sharp. Whitaker? Monroe shook her head. He disappeared the second Richard was arrested. He knows we're onto him. Emily inhaled sharply, forcing herself to stay calm. So what's next? Monroe slid a folder across the table. We traced a financial transaction made from Whitaker's Shell Corporation last week, a private charter flight to Bogotá, Colombia. Emily's pulse spiked. He's running. Davidson nodded. And if we don't move fast, he said, we might never see him again. Within hours, Emily found herself on a private FBI jet, flying toward Bogotá. Agent Monroe sat across from her, reviewing intercepted communications from Whitaker's associates. This guy didn't just pack up and leave, Monroe muttered. He has contacts in South America, medical suppliers, private security firms, offshore accounts. If he disappears there, we're never getting him back. Emily clenched her jaw. We're not letting that happen. The flight was 6 hours of torturous waiting. Her mind racing with scenarios. What if they were too late? What if Whitaker had already changed his identity? What if he was planning to continue his experiments elsewhere? By the time they landed, Emily's nerves were raw. The FBI had already set up surveillance near a private villa just outside Bogotá, a secluded, heavily guarded estate that Whitaker had purchased under an alias. He's in there, Monroe confirmed, peering through binoculars. Armed guards at the perimeter. Looks like a high-end safe house. Emily's heart pounded. We're going in, Davidson said. FBI protocols first, we get him alive. Emily's breath hitched. She wasn't interested in protocol. She wanted justice. Emily, Monroe said cautiously, I know what you're thinking. But let us handle this. We need him to talk. Emily swallowed her rage. The last thing she wanted was to let Whitaker explain himself. But she nodded. Fine, she whispered. The raid happened fast. Tactical agents swarmed the villa's entrance, breaching the main doors in seconds. Gunfire erupted from inside, but the FBI pushed forward, quickly subduing Whitaker's hired guards. Emily moved instinctively with them, heart racing as she searched the house. And then, she saw him, Dr. Matthew Whitaker, standing in the center of a luxurious office, dressed in an expensive tailored suit, sipping a glass of imported whiskey. He didn't even look surprised. Emily, he greeted, as if they were old colleagues meeting for lunch. She shook with fury. You son of a... Davidson grabbed her arm. Let us handle this. Whitaker smirked. Ah, always the overprotective mother, he mused. You never did understand the potential of what we were building. Did you? Emily saw red. What you were building, she snarled. You put a tracking device in my son's body. Whitaker sighed, as if she were being overly dramatic. Do you have any idea how much valuable data we obtained? He said smoothly. Your son is a remarkable subject. Emily, his stress responses, his physiological adaptability, he's rare. Emily lunged forward, barely restrained by Monroe. You're a monster, she hissed. Whitaker's smirk widened. And yet, he mused, your ex-husband didn't seem to mind, until, of course, he got caught. That was it. Emily broke free from Monroe's grip and punched Whitaker square in the jaw. His head snapped back, whiskey glass shattering on the floor. The agents let it happen. Enjoy prison, you sick bastard. Emily spat. Whitaker laughed, wiping blood from his lip. We'll see, he murmured. Back in Seattle, Emily stood outside the courthouse, watching as Whitaker was dragged inside in handcuffs. Richard had already been sentenced. But now, the man behind it all was finally going down. It had taken months of investigations. But Whitaker was now facing life in prison for his crimes. Emily exhaled. Nathan was safe. Her family was free. And for the first time in years, she felt like she could breathe. Come on, Mom. Nathan's voice rang out from behind her. She turned, watching as her son ran ahead toward the Seattle Aquarium, a place she had promised to take him months ago. Before everything unraveled, she smiled. Coming, she called. And as she walked toward her new life, she knew one thing for certain. No one would ever take her son from her again.